thank you all so much for attending our rescheduled webinar on greening your older home. We're so glad to have such great attendance. This is really fantastic to know how many people are really interested in this subject, and it is so critical for our ongoing mission to mitigate and reduce our climate impacts wherever we possibly can. As Emma and Celia and our team will explain, you know, older homes are a huge proportion of the homes we have, so if we can't start tackling them and their energy efficiency, we're leaving a huge gap. Just a little bit of housekeeping for everybody while everyone is still joining, just about how this works. This is a webinar format, so none of you are visible on screen. Please post any questions you have in the Q&A box, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen, and then we'll pick them up as we go. You can put in a question using your name, or you can also put in a question anonymously if you prefer, but we won't read out any names for privacy reasons, so if you do put your name, it won't get read out on screen. The meeting is being recorded, the webinar is being recorded, so we'll put it on our website and you'll be able to refer back to it at your leisure, and we'll also publicise that on our social media and so forth after the event. And that will be on our YouTube channel and on the Shared Planning Service website and the South Cambridgeshire District Council website as well. That's pretty much it for the housekeeping. I'm now going to just quickly introduce our fantastic panel of colleagues that we have here today. I should have really started by introducing myself. My name is Hannah Loftus. I'm the Communications and Engagement Lead for the Shared Planning Service, and that's the planning service for South Cambridgeshire District Council and also Cambridge City Council. We work as one shared service now, and I'm just going to be facilitating and chairing this session. We also have Emma Davis, who is our Principal Sustainability Officer in the Planning Service, who is otherwise known as the absolute expert about everything to do with carbon, and absolutely fantastic asset to our team. And we also have Celia Wignall, who is Senior Conservation Officer in our Historic Environment team. And Celia has been involved with writing the guidance on our website, which you will have probably read along with Emma. They collaborated closely on that. So they're really here to tell you a little bit more in depth about some of the questions and issues here, and then of course answer any questions that you have about how to deal with any particular issues that you're encountering. We also have Siobhan Mellon and Emma Dyer from the South Cambridgeshire District Council Communities team, and they've been organising this whole series of events around climate and the environment over, you know, last few weeks, which is just really fantastic. So they're also here to answer any wider questions you might have about what the council is doing about climate change, environmental issues and so forth, across all the different aspects of our lives that touches. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Emma. She's going to give you a really short, a brief presentation to start things off, and really outline some of the key issues. And we really look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Right, hi there everybody. I'm just going to share my screen, so I'm hoping you can all see my presentation now. So Celia and I are going to do a bit of a double act on this presentation, so it's about 20 minutes and we're just going to take you through some information about why we're working towards net zero carbon, some of the things to think about when you're looking at retrofitting older homes, and then we've got some case studies for you. We've got some local South Cambridgeshire case studies and also a case study from one of our neighbouring local authorities, and then some kind of links for you of where you can go to for further guidance. So I thought it was useful just to start off with a slide on why we're all talking about net zero carbon, what's it all about, and what's the role of kind of housing in reaching net zero carbon. So as many of you will already know, the UK has committed to reaching net zero carbon, and that's where we don't create more carbon emissions than we absorb by 2050, and that is now enshrined in law. So national and local government have been bringing forward high energy efficiency standards for new homes, but we clearly can't get to net zero carbon without reducing emissions and energy usage in all of our homes. It's not only good for the climate, but it will also help to reduce your running costs and increase the lifespan of your building. Now, the first pie chart on this slide This is showing you the kind of percentage of modern homes versus kind of homes of traditional construction. So nationally, around 20% of our homes were built before 1919 using traditional timber frame or solid wall construction methods and materials. Of this 20%, within South Cambridgeshire and Cambridge, we've got about 3% in South Cambridgeshire and 1% of homes in Cambridge that are listed buildings. So maintaining the buildings that we use now is a really powerful climate action because it locks in the carbon that was used to build those homes in the first place. So if you're able to, the responsible adaptation of traditional buildings is really preferable to purchasing a new building. And while traditional buildings in general need to be part of the big push to improve residential efficiency across the board, because there are so few kind of listed buildings, for example, if we didn't really touch those buildings, it wouldn't make a huge difference. And in fact, in their own analysis, the Committee on Climate Change have concluded that we need to retrofit about 90% of the existing buildings in the UK. So they have recognised that not all buildings can be adapted. But nevertheless, there is still plenty that can be done with almost all listed buildings and kind of older homes. So we'll come on to some of that shortly. And then the second set of pie charts on this slide, this is taken from some analysis that was done for Cambridgeshire County Council across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. And this is showing that the domestic sector in the area emits about 21% of our carbon emissions, and that the main sources of those emissions is the generation of energy used in homes for heating and appliances. So moving on now to think about, how do I start approaching the retrofit of an older home? And one of the first really important elements to think about and to understand is that older homes have fundamental differences in how they've been designed to perform compared to modern homes. And the graphic on this slide is trying to illustrate some of that. So you can't really use the same approach to retrofit a traditional home as you would for a modern home. So traditional buildings tend to be constructed from very different materials, and they have different structural forms compared with modern homes. So they usually heat up and cool down more slowly, and they deal with moisture differently. So they allow rain and groundwater and internal moisture from things like washing and cooking and even breathing to move around in a controlled way and through their semi-permeable fabric. They also rely on sunshine and wind and heating and adequate internal ventilation through windows and chimneys and drafts in order to keep dry. And when traditional homes are in good working order and good condition with regular maintenance, this whole system stays in balance. However, changes to fabric performance and heating and ventilation, if not correctly undertaken, can actually change this balance and lead to problems of things like overheating, molds, and ill health. So it is really important to have an understanding of your building. So what it's made of, how the fabric and services work together, and also what alterations may have already been carried out, which could actually be causing more harm than good. Maintaining a building's ability to regulate moisture levels is really essential to its effective thermal performance. So walls, for example, can be over a third less energy efficient if damp. And if your building is damp, then masking the problem isn't going to be enough. So finding a way of addressing the root cause of those problems is going to be the only way to bring that house back into balance. So you really do need to take care when looking at dealing with older homes and heritage assets. And that is actually recognised in building regulations for conservation of fuel and power. So for existing dwellings, they require special consideration. The building regulations note that the aim should always be to improve energy efficiency as far as reasonably practicable, and that work shouldn't prejudice the character of the host building or increase the risk of long-term deterioration of the building fabric or fittings. So on this slide, there are 4 aims that we would recommend that you follow when you're looking to retrofit an older home. So step 1 is to preserve the historic fabric. Step 2 is to extend the beneficial use of older buildings. Step 3 is then about reducing carbon emissions following the energy hierarchy. So that is be lean, which is minimizing energy demand, be clean, which is using and supplying energy more efficiently, and then be green, which is all about supplying renewable energy. And then step 4 is to specify environmentally conscious materials. We'd also recommend that it's really important to use experienced contractors who are used to dealing with traditional buildings, and to also take a whole house approach. So what is a whole house approach? So this is an approach that is embedded within guidance from the Sustainable Traditional Building Alliance, and they've developed some retrofit principles and, as shown on this slide, a retrofit guidance wheel. And this is an approach that we would highly recommend that people take when addressing traditional homes. So it's an approach that recognises that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach for traditional buildings, and that it advocates that we start thinking about fabric, services, people and context, all in combination. So this whole house approach is all about thinking about retrofit in a manner that is holistic and risk-based. So it considers 3 areas of risk, so energy, health and heritage. And taking that whole building approach, it accounts for a range of things from fabric to services, inhabitants' needs and behaviour, immediate context, so thinking about things like weather and locality, and then the wider context and thinking about embodied carbon and decarbonisation of fuels. And all of these things are integrated together for a building in balance. And they advocate using a joined up process linking assessment, design, construction and feedback. So as illustrated on this slide, the Alliance have developed what they call the Responsible Retrofit Guidance Wheel. And this is a free to use online resource. So the aim of this guidance is to ensure that responsible retrofit delivers sustained net reductions in energy use at minimal environmental impact, while maintaining or improving the traditional built environment and making a positive contribution to human health. So the wheel depicts more than 50 measures that can be used for the retrofitting or refurbishment of traditional buildings. And it encourages the exploration of the measures' advantages, concerns about performance, and then possible interactions with other elements of the building. So you can work your way around the different elements of the wheel, and then it will develop a summary report for you with the various measures that you want to consider, and it will contain all the detail of the contexts and measures chosen, their advantages, concerns and related measures, alongside details of suggested actions to minimise any risks and references to follow up. So as I've mentioned, it's a really useful tool that will allow you to take informed decisions about the measures that you want to implement. And we'd also kind of recommend that it could provide some really useful context for conversations that you might have with our conservation officers for any works that you're looking to undertake that would require consent from the local authority. Alongside the retrofit guidance wheel, the Alliance have also developed a surveying toolkit, which there's a snapshot of this toolkit shown on this slide. It is more technically orientated, but it looks at different elements of buildings. So this is a screenshot of the Windows page. And it's a surveying toolkit that's tailored to historic buildings, and it allows for the identification of elements which will contribute to the character or significance of that building in a detailed way. So you may not be able to see from this screenshot, I'm not sure how detailed you can see it, but this shows you that there are separate tick boxes for historic window frames and also for historic glazing, which don't always go hand in hand and doesn't normally get noticed when you're looking at listed buildings. So again, this is another quite useful tool that can be used. So starting to think now about actual measures and things that you can implement. And one of the most effective ways of improving the energy efficiency of your home is through combined smaller actions or quick wins. And we'd always recommend that you start with some of these lower hanging fruit really before considering some more substantial upgrades. And something that's worth noting is both South Cambridgeshire District Council and also an organisation called Cambridge Carbon Footprint have thermal imaging cameras which are available for residents to borrow for free for residents of both South Cambridgeshire and the city. Cambridge Carbon Footprint actually offers some training on their use as well. So that's a useful tool to help you do a little bit of surveying work of your home. Currently borrowing has stopped due to COVID, but should be starting up again hopefully later this year. So that can kind of help you to identify areas to possibly focus in on. So what are some of these quick wins? So loft insulation is a really easy one. A lot of you will already have loft insulation, but you can top it up. So you can cross-lay additional insulation on top of existing, and we'd aim for around we suggest aiming for around 27 centimetres of insulation. And also make sure you add draft proofing strips to your attic hatch door as well. Other areas for draft proofing, so you can look at windows and doors. You can also fill in gaps between floorboards or skirting boards. Underfloor insulation requiring all boards to be lifted can be very disruptive, but actually filling in the gaps between the floorboards, and there are a number of different methods for doing this, over a suspended floor can really help to reduce air exchanges equivalent to leaving a window opening. So the Energy Savings Trust have reported that this action alone can save around 100 kilos of carbon annually. Another spot which is often overlooked is actually in the kitchen, where there is often a gap between the floor and the wall underneath cabinets. And that's a gap that most people don't realise is there. So what you can do here is you can stuff the space under kitchen cabinets with loft insulation, and that will get hidden by the kicker boards, so you won't see it. Other quite simple measures you can install, you could look installing a chimney balloon. There's energy efficient lighting. You could upgrade the insulation of your hot water cylinder if you have one. You can add heat reflectors behind radiators on external walls, and you can also clear gutters. So making sure that water is not running down your walls and that drain pipes aren't actually discharging into the ground under your house. We can't overemphasize how important a good hat and boots are in terms of preventing cold, damp walls. And this is so important that there is actually an annual National Gutters Day, which is promoted by the Society for the Protection of Ancient Buildings. So quite an important thing to consider. Once you've addressed those smaller issues, you can then move on to more substantial works. We would emphasise that there's no point really in doing these major works if you still have drafts throughout your house. So major renovation presents really big opportunities, but it also presents the greatest possibility for mistakes and harm. So projects need to be very carefully considered using appropriate expertise and taking advantage of opportunities for enhancement with an awareness of available technology. And we'll show you some kind of local case studies on the next slide. The following options here can offer significant energy savings with little negative impact on historic significance of buildings. So often with windows, heat loss through windows, about 75% or more of the heat loss through windows is actually from drafts and not through the glass itself. So some research by Historic England has shown that simple maintenance can reduce air infiltration by 33%, whereas comprehensive draft proofing can reduce air exchanges by around 86%. Thermal blinds and thermally lined curtains also have a really dramatic effect on heat retention, particularly as most of the heat loss occurs at night. So simply by hanging thick insulated curtains, that can reduce heat losses by around 41%. Where an historic window is beyond repair, it may be appropriate to replace with double glazing units as slim as 11mm or even 6mm vacuum units, allowing for slender frames and glazing bars, which help to maintain building appearance. And actually, it's worth considering that in a lot of older houses, the windows actually tend to be quite small. So they only account for about, well, less than 10 to 15% of heat loss from your average unimproved building. So this is a good example of why you need to look at your specific house as a unique system, because it may actually be that replacing windows will have less of an impact than you were hoping to achieve. Another good opportunity is where you possibly have failing cement render on your property. So replacement of that with a more appropriate lime render will give you an opportunity to add breathable insulation to external walls. So where render is failing or inappropriate, we would recommend taking the opportunity to re-render over insulation or to use an insulated render. In a similar vein, within buildings, old internal plaster can become debonded from brick walls. So for example, in Victorian terraces, and this can reduce the thermal efficiency of the wall. So instead of putting, say, plasterboard over the failing plaster, you could actually take the opportunity to replaster with an insulated lime plaster, which is a great way of improving the thermal efficiency of walls without compromising their breathability. Boiler upgrades are highly effective methods of reducing energy use as well. And we are now seeing renewable energy technologies which are even smaller and quieter, and they can often be sited in discrete locations or effectively screened and connected to existing heating pipework. These are particularly welcomed where they're allowing for the removal of things like large gas or oil tanks. Although we would say with technologies like heat pumps, they will need to be combined with fabric improvements and used in tandem with underfloor heating or oversized radiators to ensure that they work efficiently. You can look at open therm or smart thermostatic heating control systems, which are very efficient and very compatible with historic buildings, which dislike big variations in temperature. And you can also look at things like underfloor insulation. So actually, if you are lifting the floorboards, looking to insulate under the floor, which is highly effective. Solid floors might be more compatible with underfloor heating as well, so great for use with things like air source heat pumps. So I'm now going to hand over to Celia, who's just going to take you through a few local case studies.
Thanks, Emma. So I've got a few case studies here, which are all for listed buildings. Just to focus on those for a minute. As a conservation officer, it's when listed building consent is needed that these changes come to us. And of course, there's so many things to be done before that consent is necessary. So if we look at the house on the left, this is an example of cement. The top house is before, it's cement render. It was cracking and failing, trapping water in it, and the timber frame of this property was rotting. This is a 16th century timber framed house. So as the render was off, the opportunity was taken to insulate the house. And unfortunately, because between the studs of the timber, there was historic fabric, there were remnants of wattle and daub, it wasn't suitable to put an insulation between the studs, which is what we would normally expect someone to do when they're taking this opportunity to re-render a timber framed house. Wool fibre insulation can be fantastic for putting between the studs when you re-render it. So in this case, we took quite an unusual approach of actually looking at a very slim, flexible corkboard, which was able to be wrapped over the framing of the house, and it followed the contours, the curves that you wouldn't want to lose, and it provides a key for the line render, as well as having great U-value. So you can see in the lower picture, there's a lot more texture and undulation to the surface of the house, and we think that it's preserved the character of the house whilst also improving its breathability and its efficiency. The next two examples are both for windows, and they're both listed buildings, grade 2. The one in the middle, you can see that it's got some pretty ugly windows, and so this is an opportunity to actually improve the appearance of the house by putting some more attractive windows in based on what would have been there before these windows were put in the 20th century. They're pretty unattractive, they're single glazed, they were failing, so we replaced them with 12mm double glazed windows, improving the value of the windows and improving the appearance of the house. Now the one on the far right, this is these are quite attractive windows, but they are also new. There's no historic fabric to them. The framing is not historic. There's no historic glazing there whatsoever. And again, they're softwood single glazed windows. They weren't really up to the job. And you can see that they were replaced with very similar windows, this time slimline double glazed. And that bottom picture is actually a slimline double glazed window where it really maintains the character of the property. I don't have a picture for one more thorough case study. It's ongoing, but these are all sort of individual examples, and there is that you can look at a house more of a system and do a much larger whole house approach if there are if the opportunities are there. So there's in the house that I'm thinking of, it's a 19th century, early 19th century grade 2 listed double fronted villa. It's got a beautiful gilt brick facade with original windows, and then the main part of the construction is clunch blocks which have been rendered over, and some timber framed elements which show that there's an earlier construction within that building. But it had been thoroughly renovated in the 1960s, and all of the clunch was rendered in cement render. A lot of the internal plaster had been replaced with asbestos cement boards. The suspended floor had been infilled with concrete slab, and the house was very damp and cold. And in that case, we were able to, through the consent process, have the cement render replaced, replace the internal asbestos cement boards with an insulated plaster. We were able to put limecrete instead of the concrete slabs, with an insulated base layer, dig French drains around the house, put the loft insulation in, put secondary glazing behind all the historic windows, and replace the more modern failing windows with vacuum glazing in that case. And the owners also installed a heating control in each room, and they're now considering looking at an air source heat pump. Can we have the next slide? So these are some renewable and low carbon technology examples. There's a grade 2 star listed building over here. They have quite generous grounds which were suitable for installing a ground source heat pump. They were able to remove an oil tank and rationalize the pipework, so actually it became less visually obtrusive, and it was very suitable for the heating of this house. You then have an air source heat pump. This was to a curtilage listed building, which was a converted stable block, relatively recently converted, so it was quite it was already had good insulation inside. And again, we managed to discreetly locate the pipework, put the air source heat pump in a discrete location, so you couldn't really see it from anywhere. It didn't affect any views of the listed building or the stables, and yeah, it's been very effective. And then finally, you've got PV panels. So this is not on a listed building, but it's on a barn which is just to the south of the listed building, and they are actually quite prominently sited, but it's not in a conservation area, and all of the key views of the house are not affected by these solar panels. In the same plot, we also have another barn where they're using very slim solar panels, which are only a few millimeters thick, and they sit between the upstands on a lead metal roof. So I think those are my examples. I'll hand back to Emma.
Lovely, thank you, Celia. And I just thought I'd finish with one final case study, and this is a little bit bigger in scale than retrofitting an individual home. And this is actually a project looking at delivering a renewable heat network to a whole village. So back in 2017, the Swaffham Prior Community Land Trust and Cambridgeshire County Council initiated a project to bring renewable energy to Swaffham Prior, which I believe is in East Cambridgeshire, so just over the kind of district boundary. And they carried out a number of technical studies, and it was decided to look at installing a ground source heat pump in some farmland towards the edge of the village, which could provide thermal energy to be pumped through a heat network to homes within the village. In March 2019, a grant was received for the project, enabling the appointment of a project team. And more recently, planning permission for the project was granted in November 2020, and construction of the heat network is actually due to start this summer. And they've had lots of residents showing interest in signing up for this project. Swaffham Prior at the moment is a village that is not on the gas network, so most of these properties have oil tanks in their garden. And in the village there are 47 listed buildings and 1 listed garden as well. So this is a really nice example where you have a project that aims to support the long-term preservation of these buildings by providing a sustainable and cost-effective heating system. And it's a system that's no more invasive than the existing oil heating system, and it's actually enabling the removal of oil tanks, so improving the local conservation setting of these buildings. So this is a really exciting kind of project at a much bigger scale, and kind of recognising that not everybody is going to have a garden that's going to be big enough to have their own ground source heat pump. So it's looking at how you can take a more community scale approach in a rural environment. So that's a really nice project. There's quite a lot of information online about that project as well. So finally, before we kind of get onto the Q&A session, just thought it would be useful to kind of point you towards some further guidance that's available. So first off, we have now some guidance on our website on making historic homes more energy efficient. And we also offer bookable appointments for residents of listed buildings and those living in conservation areas, so that you can come and discuss potential works with us and with our conservation officers. So if you are considering carrying out works, we would really encourage you to take advantage of this service, which is a free service. I've included some links on here as well to the guidance wheel and the Responsible Retrofit Knowledge Centre from the STBA, so the Sustainable Traditional Buildings Alliance. And then another really good source of local information and local case studies is the Cambridge Open Eco Homes website. There's a couple of links here. They've got details and case studies on the website of homes that have opened their doors in the past for either real or virtual tours. So you've got some examples of Victorian and Edwardian terraces on there. And then there's also videos of the various talks that have been given as part of the wider Open Eco Homes event. And that includes talks on things like insulation, but also heat pumps. So a really good place to go for some kind of impartial advice. Historic England have also got an amazing amount of guidance, everything from quite introductory information to quite technical information on things from windows to roofs to solar panels. So again, it's definitely worth having a look at that guidance. And then the Centre for Sustainable Energy have developed a workbook, which is a step-by-step guide for the beginner to help them understand a little bit more about their house and its significance, and then to identify opportunities for energy efficiency improvements, which leave the heritage intact. And I believe all of these links are on our website, the link to which is at the top. And I think that is it from me. So I shall end the slideshow and hand back over to the Q&A session.
Thank you, Emma. That's fantastic. Thank you, Emma and Celia. I'm seeing lots of really interesting questions coming up. So I'm going to start trying to rattle through them. First question is, what is the progress on the SCDC, so South Cambs, and the Cambridge City, I believe, application for LAD funding to refit properties for people who are renting and or with lower incomes? And I suppose, firstly, I'm going to pass this one, I think, to Siobhan, but maybe you want to explain what LAD funding even is for those who are not initiated into the wonders of government acronyms.
Sure, thank you, Hannah, and thank you very much for this question. So this funding is the Green Homes Grant funding, which the government have made available under the COVID Green Economic Recovery. And the Green Homes Grant Scheme involves several different sort of sections of this funding. Part of it is vouchers that that householders can apply for directly, and part of it is local authority delivery, LAD. And the local authority delivery scheme is in two parts, phase 1 and phase 2. Now, the local authorities in Cambridgeshire have got together and have been successful in a bid for funding under the first phase of this. And I'm not sure of the details for the rest of Cambridgeshire, but I know that what this means for South Cambridgeshire is that we have funding for up to 40 retrofits of park homes where lower income households live. And the reason that we focused on park homes for this first phase is because it's a very short delivery window. We need to deliver this work by the end of September. And we know that there is work that needs doing on park homes. And we also know that that once we are able to make good connections with the site, they're all close together, the suitable properties. Now, the second phase is a bigger phase, and we are currently, I've just actually come from a meeting about this. We're working as local authorities to work out what we're putting in as our as what we're wanting to achieve through that phase. It's slightly different. The funding is already allocated. There is actually I won't say the figures because I can't remember them to be precise, but there is money allocated for Cambridgeshire, and we're just working out where we're going to target that funding, but we will certainly be doing work under that scheme, and that work is due to be completed by the end of December.
Thank you so much, Siobhan. That's really, really helpful. Going on to the next question, which is from somebody who has a really interesting sounding home with older parts dating to 1750 up to 1974. And by the sounds of it, you've already done some really fantastic things here in terms of already improving your roof insulation and also your windows. The question is, what could you do next, as it were? You ask, what can I do to improve the thermal value of the walls, which is sympathetic to it being an older property? We are also shortly changing from oil-fired central heating and hot water to air source heat pump. I'm just going to pass this one over to Celia, and then maybe Emma might want to come in a little bit on this one as well.
Thanks, Hannah. I'd just say with this one, it sounds like you're doing an awful lot of the right things, and that it is about going as far as you reasonably can. Not every house has to be a full eco retrofit. If you're doing all the right things and taking it as far as you can without prejudicing the character, then you're absolutely on the right path. I just wonder if Emma can say a few words about the heat pump.
I suppose the important thing is just making sure that your home is thermally efficient. So with heat pumps, because they give out a lower grade of heat, it's a lower temperature heat than a more traditional kind of gas boiler. They work much better in homes that are quite, not drafty. And also they work really well with things like underfloor heating and also oversized radiators. So heat pumps, it is quite just important just to make sure that you're not just going straight to putting in a heat pump without having carried out some of those other measures first. And then just thinking with things like air source heat pumps, they can sometimes be a little bit noisy as well. So just thinking carefully about where you're siting them. I'm not sure if that helps at all.
It sounds like you have the person who's asked this question has a lot of knowledge already, so I expect you're probably maybe using a specialist. But for the wall question that you asked, it will obviously depend very much on those materials, but some of the tools that Emma has linked to in the slides, and there's also a question about when are the slides going to be available. We will be putting all of this on our website afterwards. Some of the tools that Emma pointed to probably will be really helpful in assessing those different materials. Clearly newer materials, have different approaches to the older ones. And then maybe you could book an appointment with the surgery, as Celia suggested, if you want to talk about the more historic parts of the property in a bit more detail. Just going to keep whizzing on because there are more really good questions here. So the slides, yes, the slides will be available for you to use, and yes, we'll be putting them on our website after the event. I expect Emma Dye will also email out everybody who has registered for the event, so we can point you to that once that's gone live. Then there are a couple of questions around how the role of planning it for new build houses, and I'm going to sort of lump them together just for time really. One is saying, you know, why don't we enforce some of these principles with developers of new build homes which still use carbon inefficient fabrics and non-climate friendly materials? And then there is another kind of question further down here, I think, which I just sort of trying to scroll down and find it, along similar lines about the sort of upgrades and so forth. So I mean, the short answer is yes, we do try and enforce as much as we can with new build, and Emma is very involved with our new builds as well, across from the big strategic sites at places like Northstowe through to sort of more one-off projects. And we already, the building regulations already require them to be built to really much better standards than ever before historically. There is definitely more we can do. Emma, do you want to talk a little bit about what we're doing in terms of the upcoming local plan?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have got a few policies at the moment, both for Cambridge and also for South Cambridgeshire, that require carbon reduction improvements that go beyond current building regulations. But as part of our work on the new local plan, we are working with some consultants to actually develop a suite of new policies to deliver net zero carbon. So that is looking at making sure that buildings are constructed to require as little heating as possible, to require as little energy as possible, and for that energy to actually be generated on site. So looking at, say, solar panels for all new buildings. So it is an area that we are currently developing new policy on, and there will be further rounds of consultation on the local plan later this year. So you'll start to see the kind of change in direction in policy, and it is quite different to the policies that we have at the moment. And we are always encouraging developers, even in the absence of that policy now, whenever we talk to developers and have pre-application meetings with them, we're impressing upon them the fact that in a few years' time, for example, they won't be allowed to fit gas boilers to new homes because they are going to be banned. So we're trying to encourage developers to actually start changing approach now, start looking at the electrification of heat. So I'm certainly seeing a lot more applications coming forward that are using things like heat pumps, mostly getting air source heat pumps at the moment, but we're also seeing some ground source heat pumps coming forward as well. So yeah, watch the space. We're developing policy. We're looking at things like embodied carbon as well, which is all part of the piece of dealing with net zero carbon. So it takes time to develop policy, but we are looking at it at the moment.
And I think it's just worth saying that one of the challenges we always have, and I think we've learned this from our consultations, is that we know you as our communities here, whenever we consult on this, you want us to go further, you want us to be harder, you want us to be more ambitious. Unfortunately, we also have something called central government up here, which sets national standards. And there is sometimes a conflict there because we aren't always allowed to go as far as we would like. A good example is water efficiency. We would like to be able to ask for much stronger water efficiency measures. We're simply not able to do that because we'll be challenged from a national perspective when that plan comes to examination. So all I can say is keep campaigning for these things in your different ways. We really, really want to see that kind of come through. You definitely have, you know, we want that as much as you do. I'll just come on to some other questions now. There's a few questions here, which I'll just lump again into one for Celia around double glazing and single glazing. So there's a question saying, I have a case where incongruous single glazed softwood windows could be replaced with double glazing, but there's a cost question here. Slim units preclude replacing cement render with lime mortar. What is the balance here in terms of the gains? Celia.
Thanks, Hannah. So yeah, it brings up the cost implications, which can be fairly high when it comes to things like replacement of windows. In this particular case, I would say that it would probably be better to focus on the walls in this case. The return in terms of the energy efficiency, if you were to insulate the walls and make them breathable and get rid of the cement render that might be trapping any water, removing any damp in the property, is going to be very much higher than the return on replacing the windows. Normally about a quarter, about 3/4 of energy loss through windows is from drafts and gaps around the glass and the frame, and not actually through the single glazing. So there's an awful lot that can be done in terms of draft proofing or even secondary glazing, which is very affordable. I mean, ideally, where the windows are historically valuable, we would suggest having refurbishing the windows to make them draft proof and more in their own right. But that can itself be quite a financial burden, quite expensive in its own right. But there are many cost-effective ways of draft proofing windows, and I think if you were to do that balance, I would focus on the walls.
Interesting that the questioner here has actually put a second question in saying, well, the original windows are rotting, so will have to be replaced anyway. I don't know if that changes your advice, Celia. Yeah,
that is an issue. If they're rotting, then obviously that's a maintenance issue that needs attention. In terms of what the question was, why can't it just be a standard double glazed window? And that it comes down to the character of the house, and it's something that we have to go on precedent and appeal as well. And it's been shown that while double glazing can be used in extensions, standard double glazing in extensions and annexes and attachments to a listed building, where it actually affects the historic structure itself, particularly as the facade of these buildings, and then it's been shown at appeal that we can accept slimline glazing, double glazing, but not standard double glazing. And so we're looking at a difference of whether the glazing is actually going to be 6 millimeters, 11 millimeters thick, or if it's going to be more like 3 centimeters thick, the 28 mil standard. And that obviously has a massive effect on the glazing bars and the frame and the size of all of that holds it together. And it does end up having a knock-on effect. And it is something that we really do encourage slimline double glazing where there is that opportunity.
A couple of other questions around windows, Celia, while we're on the topic. One says, in the question says, it is so difficult to get permission to fit double glazed windows and insulate walls to a listed building. The process seems very slow, and as if you were fighting just for simple improvements when the listed building was imposed on you in the first place. And there's a second question similar. What is the current policy for installing double glazing into a grade 2 star property?
Okay, so the process, when you actually put the listed building consent in, we've got 8 weeks to return a response to you, the same as for planning. I would really strongly encourage engagement before that, particularly through our new surgery that Emma was telling us about. Where we can discuss all of these things before you would put in your application, so there's no surprises. You know exactly what will come through that process. And then I would also say about it being imposed that listing applies to a very, very small number of buildings, and it's, as an owner of a listed building, you're a custodian of shared heritage, and there are some constraints that go with that. But as I said, if you contact us through our surgery, then we will try and ease things through. And what's the current stance on it? Is unfortunately a case-by-case basis. You have to look at the circumstances of every single case on its own merits.
Thank you very much, Celia. I'm just going to move on to a few questions asking about contractors and whether we can either recommend contractors or not. Or, unfortunately, and I'm sure you'll understand, my answer here is going to be that we can't really recommend you individual contractors, because of course we can't be responsible for the performance of those contractors. There are different schemes. You can look to see if they have something called PAS 2035 registration, and we'd also recommend looking at some of the case studies that Emma mentioned and following up with them. But we would really strongly urge you to seek references and also examples of their work from other places before going down the line. Same as with any tradesman or anybody really that you would be looking to work with going forward. Just do some homework on them. Do talk to other people who've had similar projects done. You know, you can look up those sorts of projects in your local area, also using our planning application search and comment webpage. So for instance, you can look at past applications on listed buildings in your area and just go around and have a little look and see whether you like what they've done. And we would also recommend that, if you're using an architect, or a designer, you do choose someone who has expertise with historic buildings in the past. There are also some accreditation schemes if you are looking for that really specialist advice. But I'm afraid we can't obviously give you a list, sadly, of contractors who we would recommend.
If I could just add to that, actually, Transitions Cambridge have got some very useful fact sheets on their website on different types of renewable energy. And I'd also recommend, if you're looking at renewable energy, if you're looking at things like heat pumps, for example, you want to make sure that the installer is MCS certified and accredited. And on the Transitions fact sheets for heat pumps at the bottom of that page, it will direct you to a directory of installers. So it's worth making sure that they have those accreditations as well.
Thanks, Emma. I'm just going to turn over to some questions around heat pumps and boilers, because this is a really, really interesting one. So as Emma mentioned, we know that gas and oil boilers are being phased out, and soon you're not just going to be able to buy one at all. So if you've got one in your house and it breaks in a few years' time, likelihood is you're not going to be able to buy the same thing again. So if you're looking to do upgrades, that's something we would really recommend you think about going forward. A few questions here. One is really just saying, yes, when we talk about boiler upgrades, we're not actually talking about upgrading a quote-unquote boiler to another quote-unquote boiler. We really are talking about a boiler to some alternative form of technology that might potentially be a heat pump or similar. There are obviously other renewable sources of heat out there as well. And then there is a couple of things about the renewable heat incentive and pellet boilers. Emma, do you have views on wood pellet boilers? And I don't know about the renewable heat incentive, but is that still lasting into 2022? Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
Ooh, wood pellet boilers, whenever I've mentioned them in Cambridge, I normally get environmental health shouting at me for their quality concerns. And I think certainly in terms of biomass, it's not something that, say, the Committee on Climate Change are recommending moving forwards in terms of renewable heat, because it's not truly renewable. So biomass boilers, they can be useful. I'm not sure if they still count under the renewable heat incentive. I'd need to look at it in a little bit more detail. But they are certainly things that people have had installed. We have got a few biomass pellet boilers. I know in Cambridge, for example, there's one at a sheltered housing scheme, but I think there's concerns around sustainable sourcing of fuel and things like that. So they're not always as eco-friendly as they're made out to be, although they are a useful source of heat. I'm afraid I don't know enough about the renewable heat incentive to be able to say exactly how long that's going on for. But you would have hoped that government would be looking at renewing grant schemes in order to help support the transition to net zero carbon. So I can only hope that there will be a successor to that, because a lot of people are going to be electrifying heat over the next few years. So.
And there's a couple more questions around ground source versus air source. And I think one of the questions that has been raised is that there's perhaps a perception that air source heat pumps can't put out water or heat at a very high temperature. One person here says that they have a two-stage air source heat pump which can put out water at 80 degrees C, which is very hot if required. But if you don't address drafts, etc., it will cost you a fortune. And that really plays, Celia, doesn't it, to your point when you were being asked about windows versus walls, and actually the air tightness and the insulation of the walls and the gaps around your windows do make a huge amount of difference. I don't know if anybody on the panel, whether Celia or Emma, you'd like to talk about that a little bit more.
I can come in very quickly. There is certainly, I think, a fuel poverty concern. So I think that comment was making the issue about the cost. That's something that Committee on Climate Change have noted with the electrification of heat, is that actually it is more expensive than gas, which is why you do need to, get the technology right and get the kind of basics right. Otherwise, you will be spending a lot more on your heating. And I think there was a project a number of years back, I think in Huntingdon, where they did put in air source heat pump into some social housing. and I think it did lead to fuel poverty for some of the residents because issues like drafts weren't addressed at the same time. So there's lots of lessons being learned. But yeah, there is this known issue around the cost and how you can, how we can make that fair for everyone across society. I don't have the solution, unfortunately. I wish I did, but yeah, it's I do hear people say that ground source heat pumps are a lot more efficient. They're better suited to the UK climate, but they're not everybody's got the space for them. So you either need a large garden space to put boreholes or to lay the horizontal system, which is why, a community scale approach like we've seen at the Swaffham Prior. And I think I had a call with the person involved in that project, and there's another 25 villages in England at the moment looking at similar projects. So, maybe that's a route to explore more as well for some of our villages.
Thanks, Emma. And yeah, I think there is that you've handily picked up on another couple of questions that I'd tagged for answering here, which are about ground source versus air source. And I think, my experience as well is that that's correct, that ground source is really effective if you have the space and the resource, but it is much more money to put in the first place than an air source heat pump, which the costs are coming down all the time now, and they are essentially like a sort of small fridge that you just put outside your building. And finally, on the heating systems question, there was also a good question about passive circulation, wet solar powered heating systems for hot water heating. And yes, they are really good. So you can have, essentially a passive solar collector on your roof that will heat hot water for taps and so forth. Not necessarily enough for your whole heating system across your whole house. But Emma, sorry, I'm coming back to you again on this one, but you're very familiar with these. I have one of these on my roof, I'm going to say, and it does work really well. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, we've not actually seen them combined with air source heat pumps yet, but it could be a useful option because I think it is often that concern about air source heat pumps and hot water, and does that drive your cost up? So I think we are seeing schemes where they're looking at combining different technologies to do something else to do the hot water, the domestic hot water, and then the heat pump is just focusing on the heating itself. We've not seen solar collectors used yet, so that might be an interesting one moving forwards. In some schemes, as I say, I tend to focus more on new build. It may be because they're actually sticking loads of PVs on the roof, so they haven't got enough space on the roof for the kind of the solar heat, the solar hot water. But it's certainly something, combining technologies is potentially a good approach if you have the space. Yeah.
I'm really mindful of time. We've got a couple of minutes left and still so many great questions. Paul, maybe do you want to just put the contact details up? So if we don't manage to answer all the questions, we always do put answers on our website when we publish the webinars. So don't worry that you're not getting your question answered, but I'm going to quickly just run through a couple more practical ones here. What service advice is available for those of us who live in modest Victorian terraces because change is expensive? Is financial help available? I've just spent a large amount of money on a new boiler and radiators. Siobhan, would you maybe pick up on that?
Yes, so the funding that is available, so there for low-income households, there is still energy company obligation eco funding, and as mentioned before, there is some funding through the Green Homes Grant local authority delivery schemes. For households other than those low-income households, there is the Green Homes Grants vouchers, and so these do provide up to two-thirds of the cost, up to £5,000. And if you Google Green Homes Grants, that's the current government scheme.
Thank you so much, Siobhan. I'm just going to maybe try and squeeze in one or two more here. Question for you, Celia. When applying for consent for changes to a listed building, how does one establish the significance, quote unquote, of existing features that could be affected, and how is this significance balanced with the need to reduce carbon footprint? I suspect your answer might involve an assessment of that significance as per MPPF. Take us from there, Celia.
So we're limited for time. We could do a whole other talk on this. Maybe we should. But I will direct you to, there's at the end of the slideshow and also on our website, we've got in the list of resources, we have a link to the Centre for Sustainable Energy, who have produced a guide called Love Your Old Home Workbook, and that is for a resident, someone with no planning knowledge, that takes you through step by step, identifying what might be significant about your house and opportunities to make energy improvements compatible with that significance. I think it's a really valuable resource, and I really do strongly suggest looking through it as a sort of first point of call. Then, as Hannah was saying, in the NPPF, we do have a requirement to balance harm and benefit to listed buildings. And so that is the policy requirement to undertake that balance.
Thank you so much, Celia. We are really running out of time. I'm seeing a few other questions about the local plan and water supply and other matters. And I would really encourage you, if you're interested in that, to visit our website. So that's greatercambridgeplanning.org, and visit the new Greater Cambridge local plan web pages, because we actually did some webinars on some of this last year, and some of that will probably answer some of the questions that people are answering there. So we'll put those links on the website when we upload this webinar as well. But just so everybody's aware, we're trying to really kind of put lots more of this material on our website, so you can refer back to it at your leisure. I'm really mindful that I think some of us have to go to our next meetings, and also I'm sure all of you have to go to the rest of your days, but thank you so much for your really great questions. It has been a fantastic seminar, really shows that there's an audience for this stuff, so I think maybe we'll have a think as a team about what further we can do to help support. And also what's great is clearly a lot of you have already a lot of really useful knowledge, so it's fantastic that you've been sharing that with us today as well. So thank you all very, very much, and we're very glad to have had you here with us. Bye for now.